Good morning and happy Monday. Well, we are all stressed out in the world. That's an understatement. So that's why we wanted to bring Qigong. We've talked a lot about yoga therapy, but Qigong is equally or more beneficial for to alleviating the stress. That's what we have John Miller. John Miller is a Qigong practitioner for over 20 plus years, joining us live from UK. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure.
So let's understand, how can Qigong help all of us?
I quite often like to shock people by saying Qigong is really bad for stress. I think that we need to be really honest about what we're doing here. And the reason I say that it's bad for stress is that my personal experience is that before I became a full-time Qigong practitioner, and that is the center of all my work, I was signed off work with work-related stress. And what actually happened was that I was doing about 2 hours of Qigong every day in order to maintain in order to suppress my stress level. So I could then do an 8-hour workday that was particularly stressful, particularly difficult because of the scenario that I was in. And so what I was actually doing was I was using Qigong in order to maintain a very unhealthy work environment. And I think that it doesn't matter what the technique is, that we can actually use these techniques in order to create an unnatural balance in our lives. So we need to be really honest about the way that we work with anything. What are we actually achieving with this? So it's possible for Qigong to be awful for stress, because when I went to see the GP, because I was getting these symptoms that I didn't understand, she asked me how many weeks I'd been in this situation. And when I said 4 years, she couldn't believe it. She said, nobody can cope with this for 4 years. Well, with Qigong, you can. So that's the bad news. Okay, the good news is that it's actually very easy to make Qigong very helpful for stress. But the trick is to notice why you're doing it and integrate it into everything that you do. So instead of spending time with sort of a 2-hour practice or a 1-hour practice that you constantly de-stress, 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 take the bits that you get from the practice and use them throughout the day. I quite often say that what I was doing, I'm very fortunate. I live just about a mile away from a deer park. So if you watch the deer in the park, if something spooks them, they go into the stress response. And what they then do is they run away. Okay, things deer don't do after they've run away. They don't go and post on social media to say how awful the experience was. They don't hang on to the stories they can tell their nearest and dearest at the end of the day. They don't worry if they could have run away any better. They simply let go and carry on. That's the natural response. That's the way that we are engineered. So what we should be doing is using practices such as Qigong, such as yoga. Any of these practices, we can use them throughout the day in order to actually drop our stress levels down, give ourselves a moment to come back into a state where all the internal pharmacy, all the internal chemicals that are taking the energy away from the immune system, the digestive system, all of these other functions. This is what happens in the stress response. Take a moment, allow the stress to go, give yourself a moment to actually come back into balance. And then you find you have a far more natural balance, but you also find you have the awareness of what you're doing for yourself that isn't particularly helpful. So the good and the bad of stress with Qigong.
I think that's fascinating. So let's just talk a little bit more scientific. When we practice Qigong, yoga, there's a lot of research, right? It helps with the autonomic nervous system. So explain us, when we're practicing Qigong, what happens to our nervous system, or is there some kind of an exercises? Just talk to us a little bit more in detail.
I think the simplest model to use is looking at the difference between the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. When we're in a sympathetic response, I quite often get them around the wrong way. When we're in a sympathetic response, what happens is the body starts to fuel itself with adrenaline. It starts to fill itself with cortisol. It starts to fill itself with all kinds of chemicals that make us more effective when we have a perceived threat. Now, there are actually multiple stress responses. There's some fantastic work out there that talks about the challenge response and the tend and befriend response. So we start to talk about when people say, I work well under stress. You're still fueled by adrenaline for a period of time, but you then have something called DHEA, which is a hormone that helps the brain to start to utilize all this energy that's rushing around the body. And so you can think more clearly when you're under stress. So this is the typical, I'm coming up to a deadline, right, focus. This is also a stress response. And so is the tend and befriend response. So when you have those moments of becoming disproportionately strong or brave, or my wife might say stupid, and you go and help somebody in a situation, this is also a stress response. And the body will then flush with dopamine and serotonin and cortisol and all of these other good things. These are all stress hormones. Now, the thing that's interesting to me is that if you're in those types of stress responses, if you've just gone and helped somebody who's had an accident, or if you've just sort of finished, you've got to a deadline, you know you can switch it off. And that's a very natural response to use. But when we get triggered in other ways, we don't necessarily know when to turn the stress response off. And so really what we're doing is by taking these moments to reset, to quieten the mind, to relax the body, what we're really doing is we're allowing this cocktail of hormones and chemicals that are rushing around the body to start to bind back and come back into a more balanced state. So to me, although there are scientific studies around Qigong, I think it's more interesting to talk about the application of it, because quite a lot of the scientific studies will talk about, well, if you do this particular form for an hour, then you will see these benefits. But how many people have got that time in the real world? If you can use these short little interventions, so it could be as simple as just take a moment to roll the shoulders, take a moment to quieten the breath, take a moment just to relax body, relax mind is one of the core strategies we have within the practice. And that goes across pretty much all schools of Qigong. When we learn these techniques, then what we're doing is we're giving that internal pharmacy the opportunity to come back into a state of balance. There is work that I'm trying to make happen at the moment in the UK, which is about looking at how we can use a range of different approaches, including yoga, including Qigong, Tai Chi, mindfulness, a whole plethora of them. Luzhong's also come into the mix at the moment, and look at how they are effective. But trying to find studies that demonstrate the effectiveness of multiple approaches, or trying to actually fund those, is not the easiest thing. So at the moment, the scientific research is still a little way off, but the ideas are really solid behind it.
Okay, so Qigong can be especially useful for elderly, like 65 plus. Do you want to comment a little bit on how it can help with the senior population?
I think one of the things that's really nice about Qigong, and this doesn't go across the board for all Qigong schools, but there is a general acceptance of we can work with people with mobility issues. We can work with people who may not have that level of flexibility, because the movements can be very, very simple. They can be very small. You know, we haven't got to be in full horse stance, you know, we can find small versions that we can help people to do. And again, I'd say that I'm pretty sure that this exists within yoga, but the way that yoga is developed in the West, we tend to find that there tends to be more emphasis on the bigger movement. Qigong hasn't quite got to that stage yet. So it means that we can start to use far smaller movement. And the purpose of the movement isn't in doing a beautiful dance. I don't believe in Qigong competitions and who does the most beautiful Qigong. It's completely pointless. I did some work in a school a number of years ago, and there was one of the students, he had obvious physical disability. And when we were doing the Qigong, he was quite concerned because he was saying, I can't do these movements. And I was saying, it doesn't matter. Just imagine that you do the movements. Just picture them in your mind and allow the body to respond as it wants to respond. And he spoke not only about the benefits of that and how liberating it was just to be able to think about it, but the other thing that was fascinating was that because of the physical disability and the mobility issues that he had, he had a greater understanding of how his body worked than anybody else in the room. And so I find that working with people who have these types of limitations, no matter how great or how small, you know, it may be that you've just got a slightly dodgy neck or a sore shoulder, you can still do the practices and gain massive benefit from them.
Okay, so I know we are sitting. Do you think we can do a small demo of maybe simple breath or simple movement, or you talked about the rolling your shoulders a bit?
Oh, thanks. You know, hadn't lined me up for this. Oh, yeah, okay, no problem, no problem. This is the point. I'm glad I'm not wearing pajama trousers, isn't it? Okay, so I'll do a short sort of standing piece. If I just adjust the camera slightly so that you can see a little bit more clearly. So if we pick something that's quite generic across multiple systems of Qigong, one of the ideas that we've got is stand with the feet sort of shoulder width apart, or if you're seated, take a moment to adjust your posture. And the reason you want to adjust your posture is you want the spine to be open and relaxed. So there's a lovely idea here of lift Bahui. Bahui is the crown. And allow it to gently lift and notice the neck and the shoulders release. And then allow the breath to settle. So down into the abdomen. There's many ways to do this, but just allow the breath to settle. Then a very simple Qigong movement. It's like a slow motion sigh. We can breathe in, allow the hands to rise, and we can breathe out and allow them to sink. So this coordinates with the breath and it travels at the speed of your breath. Now this by itself is calming, but if you then link an idea to it, so we can imagine as we draw in clear, fresh energy, blue sky, I like the idea of. And as we breathe out, we can let go of disruptive thoughts, discomfort. So it's simply the idea of release, let go of the stuff that's holding you back. And then on the in-breath, draw in fresh potential, draw in, we say Hunyuan Qi in the system that I practice in. And so that movement, this can be the basis for a very long practice, and we can adapt it. You know, we can have releasing out to the sides and gathering in from the sides. We'd call this practice La Qi. But the basic idea of release and gather and allow the whole body to respond. This is a very simple movement that anybody can take on and make a real difference with. And the piece that I think is really powerful in this is you haven't even got to move your hands. You can just take a moment to take an in-breath and then breathe out and release. And you can do that anywhere. You can do that in the queue at in the shops. You can do that while driving. You can do it anywhere. Take these very simple movements and do amazing things with them. Obviously, if you want to learn more about the practice, we can talk about the bigger movements. We can talk about this is the bit I disappear off camera. No, all of the big movements and why they have benefits and how they can tune up different parts of the body, different organs, different meridians. But why make it complicated? Enjoy the simple. And if you enjoy the simple, then you can go and find out more and tune that simplicity up and make it more effective.
Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much. I know it was just a surprise and you were explaining it so beautifully, so I have to ask this question. Well, thank you so much for being such a sport. And thank you so much for educating us, especially as you mentioned, Qigong has smaller movements. It's more applicable for the senior population because they don't have to do all these acrobatics that yoga has, you know, all kind of asanas going, flipping up and down. So this is an easier movement, you know, for especially for seniors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you again for everyone. We are launching our workshops. Stay tuned. Keep supporting us. We're almost at 200,000 followers on Facebook. So really, really appreciate the support and really appreciate the support of all the experts, international experts who are coming and sharing their knowledge with us every single day and making holistic lifestyle accessible to everyone in the world. With that, thank you and namaste. Bye-bye.